Good afternoon. Welcome back to the B&H event space. You're tuned into state-of-the-art smartphones and the future of photography. Uh-oh. Are all my DSLRs and mirrorless cameras going to be obsolete?
Maybe.
Uh,
Not yet. Not
all
yet.
right.
DSLRs maybe. Mirrorless though, I think you have a few more years.
All right. So I got a few more years. I'm going to turn it over to you guys. Welcome back. It's good to see you. I'm assuming are you guys on solid ground right now? Or are you in the middle of traveling break?
No, we're back. We're back. We've been on a big summer trip with lots of adventures. So it's good to be back and be talking to you, Derek. And we have so much AI info to share. Today, we're focusing on smartphones.
Awesome. Well, I'll let you guys do your thing. I will remind everybody to jump into the chat and drop them some questions. I'm as interested as you all are to see where photography is going from here. And if you haven't gotten caught up with the series, please do. We'll make sure to get some links dropped into the YouTube as well. Susan, Cliff, take it away.
Thank you so much, Derek. Hopefully you guys can see our screen over here. This
Looks
is what, the
good.
6th or 7th installment now. We've been doing this for quite a while. And as you can see from this one, it's fall season. And with that comes fall foliage, one of our favorite times of year, and also some new phones. Right. So we figured this is a perfect time to talk about AI as well as what's going on with the future photography and mobile and smartphones, right? Not just Apple's iPhone that just launched, but also some of the other tools as well. And if you don't like one tool, you wait 6 months and something else new will come out. And I think everyone benefits from that. But where we are right now, October, I believe, 2024, we want to give an update a little bit about what tools we have available to us, where this is all headed, some of the new cool features that are coming out. And it's just going to be a wild ride. I think, at this point, all the new tech is coming out is being launched in these phones first because they're basically supercomputers in our pocket. And a lot of that tech starts to trickle down into our DSLRs and mirrorless and stuff like that too. So a lot of that newer stuff we see on our phones first. And so this is a good opportunity to kind of introduce you to some of that. And also, if anyone's in the decision-making process of which tools to get, which phones to buy, we're going to shed some light on that as well and show you some of the features, some of the updates, and talk about also some of the differences between them. Yeah, is there anything else you wanted to add to that, Susan?
Well, I think this is an exciting episode because as photographers, we're always picking up our smartphone. So if it's the phone that you always have in your pocket, why not get the best? So since Cliff was saying all the new phones are coming out, iPhone 16 Pro is the newest one. So obviously it's going to have the newest and greatest technology. It's interesting to look back at all the other ones. And Cliff and I are actually smartphone users and we're the iPhone users. So for me, this was really exciting to learn a little bit about what Android has up its sleeves. So Cliff is Mr. iPhone. I will be Miss Android, and I will do my best to represent Android, even though I don't own one. So give me a little slack here, but we're excited to kind of dive in and do this little smartphone showdown to show you guys the new technology that's out.
Yeah, and I will say our last trip, right, we were in the Dolomites and we had one of our students have a Pixel and a lot of had our iPhones, and it was eye-opening for him to see some of the tech that we were using. And at the end of it, he was like, "Oh my God, should I be getting an iPhone?" But it also, he said something that was really interesting. He said, "Well, what if you get one of the Pixel phones or the Samsung new phones?" I think he may have had a Samsung, and he's like, "Well, it'd be nice if you understood some about what's going on in the other side of this equation." And I think he was absolutely right. So this is a good opportunity for us to learn a little bit more about what's going on outside of our own ecosystem. And then I'm thinking others might benefit from that as well. So that's kind of where the genesis of this came from. So these are the three models from the research we came up with, and we spoke to some other colleagues as well. These are the three kind of like flagship top tier models. So we want to narrow it down a little bit, right? So we had a better understanding. And we don't just have so much information that it's overwhelming. So these are pretty much right now, October 2024, these are the models that we have to work with that are pretty much the flagships. This might change, this will change in the future. But if you're looking for a new model this year and it's fall and you're looking to get something around for the holidays or before, these are the three that we would suggest. So we're going to compare and contrast some of the differences between them, and then also even like one level above that, the differences between the photographic ecosystem between Apple and Android as well. Is there anything you want to add there, Susan, or no?
Oh, that's great. Let's
Okay.
dive in.
All right. So before we dive into some of the models, I just wanted to briefly talk about computational photography because this is like a really big topic these days, and it has to do with all of the phones, really. And I think this is really exciting. We briefly talked about this in another presentation, but I really want to take a minute and just discuss why this is so prevalent now. And like I said in the intro, all this is going to trickle down eventually into our larger sensor, interchangeable lens cameras, whatever we're going to call them in the future. But right now, all this new tech, all the R&D, all the research and development, all of the money and investment invested in this, we're seeing this in our phones first, and that's for obvious reasons. They're the most popular cameras in the world, and the money and the research is going to go to where the demand is. So all this new tech we get to demo here, and it all comes down to basically this. So I just gave you guys a quote off of Wikipedia. Basically refers to the digital image capture and processing techniques that uses digital computation instead of optical processes. That's important to understand. We're using digital computation instead of optical processes. It's almost like comparing cars to horses, right? So when we're buying DSLRs or buying mirrorless cameras, there's a limitation of physics here, right? Our sensors can only get so large, and then our lenses get larger, right? And we can only get so fast shutter speeds and sensor readouts and all the other things that are amazing, but also a technical hurdle and creative hurdle for us as well. We can almost get around that. We can almost get around physics if we're starting to use software to overcome the limitations of the physics of the hardware side of it. And all that comes down to basically computational photography. In a word, though, just to simplify this, what it really is just multiple pictures. That's all it really is. But something beautiful happens when we're capturing multiple pictures instead of a single file. So when people ask me, how does the iPhone compare to like the Sonys that we're shooting right now, and the Canons and the Nikons that we're also shooting? It's interesting because I say it's like comparing apple to oranges, right? Because we've worked with the most expensive cameras in the world when we did a trip out in Norway last year. And we were looking with large format sensors, and we work with full frame all the time and other camera manufacturers as well, micro four thirds. And what's interesting is they're only taking one picture most of the time. And so that as good as that sensor is, it's one picture. When you start capturing multiple pictures and you have a format that allows you to save and work with multiple pictures, everything opens up. And this is basically at the core of what computational photography is. So all of a sudden you get much better noise reduction. Now it doesn't make sense because of a smaller sensor, we should have a noisier photo. But you're going to find that most, not even just the iPhone, but most phones are going to have a cleaner image than even a full frame sensor has. And the reason is because noise is random. It shows up in multiple places through every picture. And if you just stack multiple pictures, multiple images on top of each other, you remove the noise, you get a much cleaner photo. So we get much better noise reduction, much more effective noise reduction because we're actually doing it on the photographic level of this, on the computational level. We're not just blurring the photo. Right? We also have a much larger dynamic range because we're not just comparing one photo, apples to oranges here. We're comparing multiple photos, capturing all the dynamic range, all of the exposures, and blending them in at a pixel by pixel level on a supercomputer. And all the new phones are doing this. And can not just capture all that information, but can display it on a much better screen than is currently available in the mirrorless cameras. And it's not like we're comparing them directly and saying, well, just ditch your DSLR or your mirrorless camera. This technology is going to and already starting to trickle down into our mirrorless. And that's what I'm excited about because we have much more capability with the mirrorless camera still. We have more lens choices, right? We have off-camera flash. We can get into that maybe at the end if you guys have questions of where and when we might choose the difference between the two. We have slow shutters, so we could do long exposures. Instead of taking a 30-second picture, we can take 31-second pictures because you can handhold a 1-second picture because the image stabilization is so good. Stack those on top of each other, you get a cleaner file, and now you get a slow shutter. And what's interesting is if you have the right software, you can change your shutter speed after the fact. That's all possible because of computational photography taking multiple pictures, right? Our depth of field can change because we can capture all the depths, and we can use computational photography to understand the z-axis or the depth of an image and choose our focal point afterwards. Imagine the creative potential that happens. We can choose not just our focal point, but also how much depth of field we want and where we want that. So if we want the nose and the ears in focus, That can be almost impossible sometimes, physically impossible with a full frame sensor and a shallow depth of field. We can do things that can override the physics of photography traditionally. And then we have spatial photo and video. I'm not going to talk too much about that, but essentially, if you have these newer goggles, the Meta, the Apple Vision Pro, and this will be more prevalent in a few years coming up, this is incredible. Like when you see your images in 3 dimensions, with spatial and then also audio now, and you can place ambient sounds and voices and stuff like that. It is an immersive experience that is even hard to convey in a format like this. We're all looking at 2D screens right now, most of us, at least. Okay, so let's go on with that. I'm not going to talk about too much about this, but I did want to bring up, because this is starting to make the rounds on the internet now. Many of you are familiar with JPEG. That's very different than JPEG XL. JPEG is 30 years old. I think it's like 32 years old now. That is wild to me, right? It's obviously the most prevalent format there is, and every website, everything you're looking at on the internet is pretty much JPEG. But it's such an outdated technology. And now with computational photography, we need something that matches. So some of the benefits of JPEG, and we're seeing this on the newer models, we're seeing this on the new iPhone, for instance. Samsung is adopting it. Google is hit or miss on this. They actually helped develop this technology. They're not supporting it fully just yet, as of October. That may change, and hopefully that will change. But essentially, this format allows us to capture even raw files with a lot more information. It's allow us to capture this multi-image computational photography in an entirely new light. So it gives us way more capabilities. For instance, we can take multiple pictures. We can embed a JPEG inside of a raw file, inside of a multi-image format, and it's backwards compatible, which is why it's so helpful. Now, as we capture more dynamic range, as we talk about HDR, we're going to have a separate video in the future about the new HDR, what that means and how we can get it and the impact and how powerful that is. This enables it. So we have 32-bit file support. We have much higher color, like 16-bit color instead of the 8-bit of JPEG. It's lossless and also lossy. And it also allows us to capture and store way more files, whether that's high-res JPEGs or raw files. It gives us way more flexibility, and it can handle the HDR support, which is huge. Adobe is behind this, so Lightroom's already using this, by the way. You might not even know it, but when you stitch together panos or HDRs and you get that DNG file, the technology behind that, they're using the compression methods, because it's all about really the compression method behind this. It's giving you a much smaller file, so it takes up less space, it's less processor intensive, everything runs smoother, and this is the modern version of the traditional JPEG. I will say it's not quite there yet, because Chrome doesn't support it. That's the world's most popular web browser. But I think that's going to come down the line hopefully soon. But all the Apple, Samsung, some Android, they're all starting to adopt this newer format, and I think everybody wins when we do. So let's dive into the iPhone first. There's a few different phones, but the iPhone is the most popular camera in the world. There's some good reasons why. It also we actually prevented from doing this video sooner. We pushed it back a little. One, because we were out of the country, but two, we were waiting for the iPhone 16 to launch, which directly after this call, I'm picking up my iPhone 16 at the Apple store.
Why,
We've been out
why
of
are
the
you
country.
ruining that? Maybe you were going to get the Google
Maybe,
Pixel.
or maybe I'll get
I'm
both, right?
ruining the
Maybe I'll
surprise.
get both. That's a good point. Susan hasn't told us yet which model she's going to get.
I don't know yet. Still undecided.
Yeah, I don't blame you. We'll wait to the end of this call. And maybe I'll change my mind. There's still a return policy. Okay, so let's get into some of the specs here. This is from the Apple launch. It was, not too long ago. I'm not going to dive into all the details here, but there are some ones that I do want to talk about because it is relevant, right? The 4K 120 you'll see on the bottom left there. We'll talk a little bit about that. There's an action button on the bottom left, but there's actually a newer button as well that's dedicated to photography we're going to talk about. You're going to see that on the top there. And photographic styles, which is kind of interesting. I think that's um, it's almost like a sleeping feature that not too many people are talking about outside of photographers, but I find it quite interesting, these new photographic styles. It's getting to more of a creative intent that Apple is unlocking for us, rather than giving us just what they assume is the sharpest, highest saturation, most contrasty photo. They're recognizing that there is the creative intention behind it and unlocking that for us in a very intuitive and easy way. And then some other things too. It's much faster and all that. All right, so basic specs. We won't dive into all this again, but the things I want to point your attention to, It is a slightly larger display, not enough the reason to upgrade itself, but it's nice to have a slightly larger display without the phone actually getting bigger. It's because the bezels are getting smaller. Slightly brighter display. Realistically, you're probably not going to see too much of a difference there, but when you're out in brighter sunlight, that does help. You're also getting, and this is a big one, we're getting a 48 megapixel sensor on the wide angle. We don't have it on the telephoto. That's important for you to know. I was kind of hoping for that because we're still a little bit behind on the telephoto side of things, but that's also one of the most popular lenses to use at wide angle. And it's a 13 millimeter wide angle. That's something to be said about that, right? I mean, how many of us have a 13 millimeter wide angle lens for our big boy cameras, or as I call them, our classic cameras, right? It's not that common. So it's nice to have a little bit better tension, higher quality images coming out of the ultra wide angle. And also because it uses that for macro photography, we're getting much higher quality images from macro as well. They also added autofocus to that. So if you're into macro, if you're into the ultra wide, this is like a huge update for you as well. All right, let's get into it a
That's
little
really
bit.
the biggest update, when you say, Cliff,
Yeah,
besides the
I would
AI.
say that that's the one of the biggest reasons to update if you're using that ultra wide. Yeah, that's huge.
As photographers, I think we all look at the camera, and most people, when you go to do your upgrade, is what are the new camera features? And, a little disappointing, like Cliff said, that they didn't upgrade the telephoto elements, but they did make it a 48 megapixel instead. I think it was 12, right? Was it 12 or 24 beforehand? I think it was
It was 12.
12.
Yeah,
So that's a fairly good upgrade to have
really is.
yeah.
Yeah, it's very helpful. And that's, a lot of people I speak to, that's the most used lens, right? Because most of us don't have an ultra wide angle. And it's a very unique, very creative way that you can see the world. And the fact that the iPhone's perfect for macro, right? Because that smaller sensor gives us a naturally, inherently deeper depth of field, which makes macro a lot easier. And the iPhone is just like the perfect tool to use for that case. And it's always using that ultra wide angle lens for that. So it's making the macro a lot easier. And the fact that we have some focus options now as well is really handy. So this is a boring slide. I get it. I want to stay on here too long. But what I really wanted to point your attention to is the fact that it's 35 trillion operations per second. That's what makes all this computational photography, this chip right here, as unsexy as this is, it makes everything that we're doing creatively possible. That faster sensor readout basically gives us better battery life. It makes it possible for us to do that 4K 120, makes it possible to do these basically zero lag shutter speeds because it's taking multiple pictures and stacking them all together. All the amazing computational photography comes down to it because of this sensor here, or this chip here, not the sensor, sorry. Okay, so we talked about the 48 ultra wide, really important. Now it has autofocus too. We have our fusion camera on the native. All that means is when you have fusion, you're taking the higher resolution and you're blending it with a 12 megapixel for better low light quality and giving you a 24 megapixel result that's giving you just the best of both worlds. We only have that on the 1X, by the way. It doesn't quite use that on the ultra wide, but you're still getting that 48 megapixel. As far as the telephoto goes, the only bummer here is that they haven't updated that yet. I was kind of really hoping for that. That is a huge factor in anyone's decision right now, whether or not to go with the iPhone or Android, is the other phones do have much better telephoto options. And that's a significant factor when we're out shooting. We spent over a month in Africa this year with the workshops we're doing. And it's a tough sell to just say, you know what, carry an iPhone with you because we don't have that telephoto, the proper telephoto yet. The 5X that we have, it's an equivalent of about 120 millimeter, right? So it doesn't quite have that reach yet. And like people are saying too, and I agree, we don't have that 3X. So we're jumping from effectively like a 26, 24 millimeter. And if you do the 2X option, which is a digital crop, you're still getting, well, it's a hybrid digital crop, but you're getting a 24 megapixel, roughly 50 millimeter. But we don't have that 3X lens that is very handy. So it's quite difficult to work with that 5X sometimes, but a 10X would be really nice. The biggest update as well, like their flagship feature for this year, one of the biggest reasons to consider getting a new phone is 4K 120. And this is quite interesting. So Apple's taken the world by storm with the iPhones with video. It's amazing to see how quickly videographers and filmmakers are adopting the iPhone. And I know this is primarily the audience is going to be around photography, but let's face it, there's a blend here. And if you're looking to get into video, even on the subtlest way, This is the perfect tool to do it, right? And one of the really inherent benefits of this is the stabilization and the frame rate. Almost no cameras we can go into B&H and get right now are shooting 4K 120. You really do have to drop a lot of money for that. It's a very exclusive feature on the higher end cameras. And even then, there's some technical hurdles you have to go through. We can shoot 4K 120 now, but in a very intuitive way that any photographer can get into this. And really, ultimately, what this means is when you're playing video back, you're playing it back at 30 frames a second, you can slow things down 4 to 5 times, and you can do it. This is why I gave that screen graphic here. You can really slow things down right after you shoot it. So you get the best of both worlds. You get 4K 120, you get ultra smooth speed, but then you can slow it down and everything looks cooler when you slow it down. It used to be that you had to use a dedicated feature in the native app for slow motion. And the problem with that was it was only 1080p and it was not HDR. So the footage didn't look good, but the quality didn't look good, but the footage looked so cool because it was slow motion. Now you don't have to choose. You can capture video as you would normally, and you could slow it down later, and you could speed ramp it and get some really interesting results. And the quality is excellent because it's HDR, 4K, Dolby Vision sound, and image quality, and it's just incredible. So this is, if you're even thinking about getting into video, this is a reason alone to upgrade. And then with spatial video, it's hard. I'm not going to talk about it too much because it's kind of exclusive to people who have these VR headsets right now. But we have this, if you ever tried on the Apple Vision Pro and you look at video or photos for the first time, it is like a watershed moment. It is something that you'll never forget. It's like looking at color for the first time after you've seen black and white. It is a monumental shift. The problem is adoption, right? The price point's high, and I think Facebook, Meta, and some of the other VR goggles is gonna help out with that. But in the meantime, it's still very much of a niche thing. But if you think about future-proofing your photos and videos, especially if they're family photos, this is the equivalent of shooting color back when it wasn't that prevalent yet. Now, when we look at it in the future, so to speak, or when we look back on it, it's actually quite helpful to have that spatial audio and video, and it's incredibly immersive. So it's not just spatial video, but we also can capture spatial audio. And there's some real world scenarios where it kind of makes sense. If you're in a crowded area, you can isolate the voice now. You can have the ambient sounds go off to the sides. You can isolate the voice, and you can place it almost like what movies do. You have a center channel audio. So the microphones have been massively improved. And again, if you're shooting video specifically, these are all very helpful, very useful features that are worthy of the upgrade. Okay, Apple Intelligence. Susan, you can take this away a little bit.
Sure. So one of the big features, if you watched the launch of the iPhone 16, is the Apple Intelligence. And this is their inclusion of AI into the phone. If you watch any of the launch videos for any of these phones, AI is the main selling point. It's like, hey, look at the AI we're entering. So besides phone features with the camera features, really, the big things to look for is the AI implementation. So Apple is calling their AI Apple Intelligence. That's their oh, Cliff, you have to go. Next slide. So
Yeah, sorry.
sure. So some of the things that their Apple Intelligence is including is writing tools. So you can use text to rewrite, which allows you to rewrite your emails and your messages to sound more friendly, more professional. They have proofreading, they have text summarization. They also have image and photo capabilities. So finally, Apple is including a cleanup app, an AI tool that removes unwanted elements. I mean, how long have we been waiting for this to happen? I mean, Android has had this for years. It's embarrassing, finally. And I don't even think it's on the phone yet. I think they have to do a software update to get this feature on there. But thank you, Apple, for including this cleanup.
Beta. It's in beta at the moment, but it's launching soon. Very, very soon. Yeah.
So Image Playground, it allows you to create AI generated images. And you'll notice that each phone is including these little things like finally iPhone has it, but you'll notice that the Androids also have this AI generated image option. They have an advanced photo search, so you can search your photo library to find specific images, which is always helpful. You know, when you're trying to find something to share with a friend, like your pictures from Rome, and you have to like find this one specific picture of you in front of the Colosseum or something. And now AI has a more advanced photo search for you to look within your own photos to find your images. Also, Siri has been improved. I don't know how many times you've asked Siri anything and it says, check the web listing, check out the website for more information. That's not helpful. So Siri is now working better. They've improved it. She has a more lifelike voice, so she won't sound like a robot as much. She can do more contextual conversations. Maybe you can talk to her like a friend. Maybe she sounds more like a therapist. Who knows? But Siri has a more conversational points. She also has visual indicators. So how do you know when Siri's working? You'll notice that the phone is glowing. So around the rim of the phone, there'll be like a little rainbow glow. It's actually quite cool. And you can now type to Siri. So let's say you're in a space where you can't actually say, hey, Siri, what's the weather? You can actually type a message to Siri and she can get back to you and answer. A couple other quick AI features is the auto transcription and summarization. So if you are in notes or on your phone app, you can summarize your messages. Also, you can identify priority messages that are sensitive in your emails. So all really helpful tools. Apple's really pushing their AI intelligence, and I think they've come a long way.
Yeah, this is the first time we're really seeing that, right? And they've been slow to the game, but in true Apple form, they're catching up quickly. And when they do it, they try and do it better than everyone else. One thing I'll mention with that is because people do ask a lot of questions about that. It's all what they call it's like your private cloud, right? It's the safety and security of this, the privacy of this is a huge issue when we're talking about AI. Because it's being trained on all of your information, your emails, your calendar, your contacts, your notes. And there's a potential of that being extremely useful, but there's also a potential of that being a little bit of an overstep, right, in our privacy. So Apple was very specific about this is all happens in a personal cloud, sometimes on the phone directly on the device itself, which is a big thing these days with AI. And it's something that, from what they're saying, right, that it's much more secure, the privacy. So it shouldn't be as much of an issue. But when it's trained personally, not just here's the internet, here's the information, but it's reading your calendar and contacts and notes. It personalizes the usefulness of AI in a really cool way that they were just starting to implement because it's not technically even released publicly just yet.
That's actually a good point. The ecosystem of the Apple software is now working all together. So if you say, hey, like Cliff said, put this in my calendar to Siri, do these things, what's really fantastic is about it is it all works cohesively. So you can use your different apps to make things work. Other things about Siri is now if she doesn't have the answer, she will link to ChatGPT. So that's like a new kind of partnership with Apple and ChatGPT. So they'll be working together, and I'm sure there'll be more elements incorporated in the technology as things advance. So moving on to the Google Pixel 9 Pro XL, that is their top tier camera at the, or phone, phone, I think everything with cameras, top tier phone at the moment. You'll notice right away that their cameras are set up a little bit differently than the iPhone. They have this really unique look with the 3 cameras in a row. And here's kind of their launch pad. This is when they launched their camera. These are their new features. You can see that they have their triple rear cameras. They have a 24-hour battery life. They have 2 different sizes, satellite SOS, Pixel Studio, which we're going to get into, and they have their best and brightest display. So we're going to kind of dive into their features next. So let's go over their cameras because that's what we think about the most. First of all, 6.8 inches, very similar to the Apple phone, which was, I think, 6.9. They use a Google Tensor G4 processor, and their lenses for the camera are 50, 48, and 48 megapixels, which is actually quite an improvement from the iPhone, which was 42, 12, and 42. So
Yeah, 48, but the telephoto is really nice to have
yeah.
that on the long end. That is huge. What that allows you to do is not just get better quality telephoto shots natively, 5x, but you can also crop into that a little bit more, which is helpful because you do have higher quality.
And if we look, go back, Cliff. If you look back to the right side, just to make sure you understand, they're 50 megapixels, they're 24, they're 48 megapixels, they're 12 millimeter, which is the equivalent of our 13 millimeter, which is only 12. Oh, sorry, that one is 48 now. But their telephoto, which we have as 12, is 48
Yeah.
megapixels. So their telephoto is also 110 millimeters, and their front-facing camera is 42 megapixels. So really interesting improvements on their camera lenses.
Yeah, if you're into selfies a lot, this is technically High resolution camera.
So one of the interesting features that they offer is called Add Me. So let's say you're with a friend and you're with this celebrity. I don't know who this is, but and you only have one person to take the picture. So you can say, go to the Add Me feature, and your friend takes the picture, and then you enter the frame on the other side. They press the button. They will use augmented reality to add both of you into the same picture. So it's kind of this interesting blending of two shots. I'm not sure how often you use this, maybe for family photos when you want to be incorporated. This is simply done in Photoshop, but it's kind of an interesting feature to have on your phone.
Yeah, I think, I mean, think about the market, right? They're not just selling these cameras, these phones and the cameras inside them to just photographers. They're just everybody. Everybody has these. And so it's a very useful feature for a lot of people, including photographers. When you're shooting friends and family and you don't have someone that can take a picture of you, this is like an actual viable solution. And I do think there's a lot of meaning behind capturing friends and family, and not just beautiful landscapes and, fine art photography. These are meaningful photos, and I think there's actually a very good use case for this. We don't have this on Apple's side. So you have to go into Photoshop or get clever with it. It's really nice to have this natively built in.
These are two other interesting features. One is called guided frame. So what it's saying is it finds what it thinks is the subject using AI. So it's this woman, she's doing a selfie. And some of their use cases are, let's say you have poor vision. I think that was really their thing. If you have poor vision or you can't tell what the subject is, it'll give you a countdown and it'll circle when you are on the subject. It'll highlight when you're on the subject. So it's helpful for you to guide the frame onto the subject that you chose. Another one is the made you look, where you have I think we're missing a part of it, but it was a little kid, and on the phone it'll flash to make the baby look. So it's great for if you're going to take a picture of your kids and you want them to look. They have a little cartoon character that you can choose from, and maybe some lights, and they have it so it flashes so the kid will look and hopefully give you a better expression than this one. But it's to help you take pictures of children. So I think those are really interesting things because, again, they're thinking about their audience, who is their market, not just photographers, but everyday family members. Next, they have something called a Pixel Studio, which, again, like Apple is incorporating, they have an image generator. So in this a particular case, they said, I want to generate a Maltese poodle. And here we go. We got a picture of a Maltese poodle. So instead of going to a Midjourney or even to Firefly, you can now generate images on your phone. So this is pretty incredible because you think about the computing power that it goes to generate images. And now they've made it with these new processors to be able to do it on your phone. They also have a magic editor. So in this particular one, I'm going to have to talk you through because it's a little bit hard to see. They use a feature called auto frame. So in auto frame, this particular guy chewing the bubble gum, he is cropped a little bit. You can't see his feet. He's cropped in tight. His foot's kind of cropped off. And they said, AI, how would you reframe this picture? So in the next scene, it zoomed out. It actually put his foot back into the picture. So it generated this picture and expanded the photo to make it a more pleasing composition using the rule of thirds, straightening out the horizon. And then the next one, which is the picture you're seeing here, is when they said, okay, we'd like to enhance the grass. Let's make it wildflowers. So they said, we'd like to generate wildflowers in the bottom elements of the picture. And here you go. So again, they're using this magic editor, which we can obviously do in Photoshop, but now with this phone, you can actually do it in the phone, which is really neat. Also in their video software, they have something called dual exposure. So if you look on the left, the video is a little bit dark and the one on the right is very bright. So in this dual exposure processing, it is now putting together the bright highlights and the shadows to create a perfectly exposed video image. And this is a new feature.
Yeah, I'll just point out too, this is what Apple's doing this as well. They just call it HDR, high dynamic range. And we're shooting 4K 120 frames per second HDR video. What it really means is it's capturing 240 frames. Dark, bright, dark, bright, dark, bright, and blending them in, which is kind of the same feature. But this is a massive upgrade. This is one of the reasons why people are shooting with their phones now, because this is one of the things you can't necessarily do or very easily do with larger sensor traditional cameras, right? When you're doubling your frame rate and underexposing and overexposing and blending it in real time, basically it means your shadows look great and your skies aren't blown out. And that's very difficult to do, and it's even more difficult to recover later in video because video gets compressed when it gets recorded. So if they're doing this at the capture stage, you're getting much higher dynamic range and much better looking video. And that's just for everybody. It's really helpful.
So a couple other features I just want to reference that Pixel 9 offers is a 20 times super resolution zoom for videos. This combines details from their telephoto camera with their machine learning to produce high quality zoomed in footage, even in low light conditions. So I thought that was pretty impressive. They also have a video boost, which enables AI powered features to do not a 4K, an 8K video capture with AI upscaling. So it's shooting it at 4K, but with AI, they're upscaling it to 8K, which is pretty wild. They
Yeah,
have
and what that means too is you can pull a frame from that video, and that's going to be around 32, 33 megapixels every single frame of that. That's actually quite useful for a lot of people.
They've improved stabilization, reduced noise, enhanced color rendering, and this is also something interesting. They have integrated Gemini. So while it's not strictly a camera feature, they integrated Google's Gemini AI assistant into the phone. It's going to interact with the camera. It'll instruct Gemini to take photos or videos. So you can now say, hey, Gemini, take a photo. And also, it's a great AI assistant. So they were kind of the first ones to come out with this. And now ChatGPT is kind of like its rival. But Gemini is interesting because you can now train your phone to be your AI assistant. And I'm not sure if it's incorporated as much as the, Siri is, but it's kind of a competitor. Gemini and Siri are kind of doing the same concept of AI assisting. So it's really interesting uses of AI technology in this Pixel 9.
Yeah, and more so than Apple, right? It's nice to see that they're really leveraging and leaning into AI from a photographic standpoint, something that we're not seeing with Apple as much.
Couple other cool things the Pixel does is, let's say you take a screenshot. I'm always taking screenshots of things I think are fun, whether it's like a cool backpack that I want to look into later, or a pair of shoes, or if it's a gift I want to buy a friend. So when you take a screenshot, it's actually creating a screenshot folder or kind of collection so you can reference it later. So let's say I want to do a search and say, hey, I'm looking for those shoes that I screenshotted. All the shoes I ever screenshotted would come up, and it also links to a website where you could possibly purchase them if it's easy to locate. So it's kind of the equivalent of using a Google search. If you guys have used that, in the Google search icon, there's a little camera and you could take a picture of it and an item and then put it in there and it can do a reverse search. This is kind of doing a reverse search, but just by taking a screenshot of your photo. Not of your photo, of an item or of your phone. So something you found that you thought was interesting, it will log them, it'll create collections, and then you can reference these images later, which I think is really interesting because I am always collecting interesting things I want to look into at a later time, and this would help you organize it.
Yeah, and to give perspective on this too, this is what Apple's calling their visual intelligence, right? So most intelligence right now is either audio or text, but when you can point your camera at anything in the real world and it gives you information about it, and not just, oh, this is what that building looks like, that's what this, bug is, but even context, like you point it at a restaurant and it brings up the menu. This is going to be really cool, this idea of visual intelligence. We're not talking about it on the Apple side because it's not actually launched yet. It's coming out with a lot of the intelligence a little bit slower later this year or early next year. But and it's not necessarily a photography feature, but that's going to be helpful on everyday use for so many people. So we are going to see this on the Apple side as well. It's just called visual intelligence.
Okay, that kind of sums up the Pixel. Let's jump into the Galaxy. So this is the Galaxy S24 Ultra. They have a bunch of cool AI features. Again, they are heavily peddling their AI additions to their phone on this new one that they launched. I think it was 8 months ago. So they're a little bit not as flashy and new as the iPhone, but they still have some great tools. So let's go to the next page and I'll jump into their thing. So let's talk about their camera lenses. So they have a 12 megapixel wide, It's pretty disappointing. But a 200 megapixel wide angle lens, which is amazing. 200 megapixels. We haven't seen that in any of the cameras. I mean, how do they even do that, Cliff? Tell us.
There's a lot that goes behind it, and it's the Bayer technology, the way they're shifting things around to create the higher resolution. It's a little bit on the marketing side as well. I'm not going to lie. But there are meaningful differences, and the higher resolution actually does help in most cases because what it allows you to do is to crop in. It gives you a lot more creative flexibility. Why? It's not just like all right, if the screen you guys are looking at us right now on, most of it is either going to be 2 megapixels, or if it's a 4K monitor, it's going to be 8 megapixels, right? So why the heck are we shooting 200 megapixels? There is a marketing reason behind it because more is better. It's no different than in full frame cameras too, right? We think more is better. But it gives you creative opportunity and flexibility as well. So you can crop in a little bit, for instance. The noise reduction could be a little bit better because there's a little more detail to capture. But realistically, if you're just comparing a 50 megapixel to a 200 megapixel and you're not doing anything to them, you're not going to see that big of a difference between the two. But still, more is a little bit better, and it's helpful to have that. Where I like to see that is on the telephoto side, which allows us to kind of crop in a little bit more. But 200 is better than 12. It's just not as huge of a difference as you might think.
Also 50 megapixel on their 5 and 10 time magnification. So they even have a 10-time magnification. That's something we haven't seen yet in the other cameras as well. So it is an
Yeah,
optical zoom, which is different.
that's huge. Yeah, that to me is more important, a 10x optical zoom than giving me a 200 megapixel sensor, right? Because they're shifting this Bayer pattern to get all the details and all that. So it's a little bit of a marketing thing, but at 10 times optical zoom, that at 50 megapixels is significantly better than what we could do with the Apple. If you're shooting sports or you're shooting your kid's soccer game or you're out on safari like we were, um, that's really actually meaningfully helpful to have.
Next. Another thing that they're talking about is their Pro Visual Engine. So, like the Apple Intelligence, like the Pixels, I've already forgot what they do, but they all have this AI terminology. So they call theirs the Pro Visual Engine, and they have all sorts of features like reducing the file size by 40%. That's pretty good. So you won't take up as much storage, faster shutter speeds. You can upscale your editing. You can post-process through their gallery and enhance with an app. They have all these different features, mainly about upscaling your images, especially if it's 12 megapixel high resolution images, and upscale it even higher. So this is what their Pro Visual Engine is adding to their arsenal of photography elements.
I think that's really cool too. We're not seeing this on the Apple side, right? Being able to have this interframe where it blends the frames together and creates new ones to give you slower motion is really, really cool. And the exciting thing about this is that they can be brought into other areas as well. And then Apple and other camera manufacturers might, or phone and camera manufacturers might adopt this, and they will.
So other features that they have is obviously the Pro Visual Engine, which is their processing. They allow you to zoom at any place, allows you to record 2 videos simultaneously, and creates a zoomed in and wider angle. So that's pretty impressive. They have an instant slow-mo, which generates additional frames to create smooth and slow motion footage from standard videos. So let's say you didn't film it in slow-mo, you can actually go back and make it a slow-mo video, which is really neat. And they have a nightography. So each one of these cameras have a different way of calling their night photography. iPhone, what do they call it, Cliff? Night
Uh,
mode.
night, it's just night mode, basically.
This one
Night
calls it
photography is the cool. It's a nice branding
Nothing
word. I
but
like it.
photography, and then even the Google Pixel had something called like night sight. So each one kind of has their different terminology, which I enjoy. This one has a improved low light photography and videography using AI to assist their noise reduction, which is really awesome. They have improved their 8K video to 30 frames per second and 4K video to 60 frames per second. Do you have anything to add on that, Cliff?
8K video is, I mean, where we are right now, most people don't have 8K monitors. But again, it's like that spatial audio and video. We have to think a little bit ahead. right? If we all look back at our photos that were taken, and I do this all the time with my students when I do the consulting through Zoom, we go back 10, 20 years or more in digital photography, and it's tough to recover some of that information if it's not captured in the right way, or they're shooting JPEG versus RAW. Like, think about the future self appreciating if we're capable of shooting these significantly important, and we don't know right now, like just how significant important thing is. Friends, family members, loved ones can pass away. These amazing trips that want to remember and pass on through generations. Think about, 5, 10, 20 years from now, the technology we're going to have in the screen technology. It's going to be really nice and useful to have an 8K video. But I will balance that with the idea of, yeah, it's digital now, right? So we have AI, and you're seeing it in this presentation, that's capable of up-resing 4K to 8K, right? So maybe it's not as significant, but if we have 8K video, the realistic feature is it is going to be higher quality. And there's apps you can use. For instance, I use Frame Grabber in the Apple ecosystem, and you can just scrub through any frame of a video and pull a file from it, pull a photo from that. And you can do that inside Lightroom too. And having an 8K video means you're getting a 33 megapixel image, right? If you have a 4K, you're getting an 8 megapixel image, right? If you have 1080p, you're getting a 2 megapixel image. So it is significant if you're thinking about shooting video and extracting stills from it for those like moments where the kid, scores a soccer goal or something like that. 8K is actually really quite helpful to have that.
Cool. So they also have a super HDR mode for dynamic range. They've improved portrait mode with more accurate depth mapping, and they have an expert raw app for professional grading controls and editing. So now they allow you to adjust your editing with I don't know, we'll have to check it out, their expert raw app. And lastly, they have a faster autofocus to enhance subject tracking and pro controls. So really cool. The Galaxy 24 has a quad telesystem, which offers 5 optical zoom lenses and has upgraded their night photography capabilities, and it can capture pictures with their larger pixel size, which is 60% bigger compared to their previous model.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting, right? Because we're talking about these tiny little sensors that are smaller than my pinky, or just like the nail on my pinky. They're tiny. So to say something is 60% bigger, well, 60% bigger of something that's just like a few millimeters wide, it is significant, but it's kind of funny to talk about that because even in the mobile photography side of things, we're talking about sensor size, which I don't know. It does help, actually. It really does help. But the real power here is leveraging the AI, the computational photography, the pure compute power, and the merge between software and hardware on these. And that we're really seeing, even more so than Apple, leveraging this AI and the compute power to create something that's not just higher quality, but creatively, things that we can't even think of doing in traditional cameras. So that is kind of cool.
One thing to just mention about the sensor size, I mean, we've always been on this bandwidth that more megapixels is the best. And that's why we're like, oh, how many megapixels is it now? But there's only a certain amount of space that you can add more megapixels, and it's not actually enhancing the quality after a while. There's even some avenues where less megapixels is better in low light scenarios, and there's some other features. So I mean, we're going to reach to a point which I think we have with real cameras, with our classic cameras, as Cliff would say, where megapixels isn't really the draw anymore. It's what we're doing with those megapixels.
Yeah, and further on that point too, it's all right. If they're basically just collecting light, that's all they are. The sensors are collecting light, and for any given period of time, there's only 2 ways you can collect light. You have your shutter speed, which is how long you leave it open for, and then you have your sensor size, right? Your aperture is sort of like the lid on a bucket. So if you have a larger aperture, sure, but for any given period of time, for any single shutter speed, a larger sensor is going to collect more light than a smaller sensor. So in every single scenario, it is technically an actually better thing to have a larger sensor every time. But what's interesting is, all right, this is really useful for the classic traditional mirrorless DSLR cameras because they're just shooting one picture. When you have a system that can capture, we're shooting 120 frames per second for video, and all video is a whole bunch of still images, right? we can capture 10 frames per second we're doing on the iPhone and blend them all together with the supercompute power that we have on these newer chips. It's less of an issue with the sensor size being the only factor in image quality in light gathering, because we can leave the sensor open for multiple pictures, blend them together, and we're removing a lot of the noise. And the dynamic range that we would get is not an issue because they're just capturing all the exposures and blending them together. So yeah, it's not as critical of a factor as, let's say, moving from a micro four thirds over to a full frame sensor, or a large format sensor where you're only taking one picture at a time. So it is a direct correlation between the sensor size and the image quality. It's less so when we're talking about computational photography, but still helpful. It is still helpful.
Another feature that the Galaxy has is their AI editing. And what's cool is they can do generating images if you move them. So basically, you could select this mug and say, hey, I want the mug to be smaller in my frame. And then AI will create the background for you. So just like how Jen expands and generate fill work in Photoshop, this is what it's doing here in the Galaxy AI editing suite. So you're able to move a subject to where you want it to be, and the background will be AI generated to replace it to the likeness of what it should be. And you can actually place things where you want it to be, recompose, you can erase things, and you can also add things. It's really neat.
So I know this seems ridiculous. And first of all, I like the idea that they made it smaller. It's a lot harder to take something big and make it smaller than make something smaller and make it bigger, right? So kudos for them for doing this. I know this seems ridiculous. I know photographers are probably like, oh, come on, really? You're not going to believe anything. But what I think is really interesting about this is it's getting people, it's getting creatives, whether you call them photographers or not, doesn't matter. You're getting people who have this device, you're getting creatives thinking about what would make a photo better. They're not just accepting it, right? And I think that's going to be helpful in the long run. And they should maybe consider the arrangement of the elements in the scene and talk about critical composition and compression and trying to understand the relative distance and compression and expansion capabilities of focal lengths and all that as they get more and more into photography. But as an entry-level thing for people who are just looking for a camera, it gets them thinking a little bit differently rather than just taking a snapshot and accepting what is. And I think that on just about any level, even from a purely creative one, is actually really cool and helpful. And it just gets them thinking a little bit differently. So I like the idea behind this, even though the implementation is questionable. I like what gets you thinking outside the
Mug
box.
cliff? Come on.
Well, it could be anything. That this is an example, but when you're thinking about what would make this photo look better, that's already a good perspective to have when you're taking pictures.
Sure. Another thing you can do is correct a crooked picture. So in this picture, they photographed this salad bowl, and the salad bowl was crooked. So when they turned the picture to correct the orientation, there was nothing to put in the corner. So AI generated what it thought would be the rest of the plate. So you can adjust the picture even if there's crooked and fill the borders like you can in Photoshop.
We can do this inside of Photoshop, exactly. We can't do this inside of Lightroom, which is a bummer because we have that on our phones. We can't do this in Photoshop on our phones. It's actually a little bit difficult for the iPhones to be able to do this natively. And I think this is like maybe one of the most useful features, even though, yeah, there's an element of the photography being careless or lazy and not getting things right. Or if you have a higher resolution sensor, you can just shoot a little bit looser. Apple does have a feature they call crop out, which is capturing both your ultra wide and then your 1x sensor. So you can crop out a little bit if you enable that. But being able to utilize AI and do this in camera, I think that is pretty helpful. But I can also see why, I mean, come on, just more carefully compose things, but it is useful when you need it.
Another interesting thing that Google has is circle to search. So they have this ability. You can be in any of your apps. You could be on Instagram, you could be in Pinterest, you could be anywhere, and you can use your finger, or they have a cool pen that comes with their phone. You can circle an item, and when you circle it, it'll take you to a website where you can find like-minded things. Like if you look on the second picture, it looks like that's where you can find the glasses. So it looks like where you can go shopping. You can actually circle something and save it for later. It's just an interesting feature to incorporate Google search features by just circling items.
Yeah, you'll notice AI is being implemented quite a bit to help people spend more money online.
Also, they have a live translate. So let's say you want to have a conversation with a uh, speaking friend that speaks a different language than you. So you can have a real-time translation of the phone call. You could do it on the phone. You could do it in person. They have a chat assist. If you want to have better written emails to your boss, something that sounds more professional, they can give you some phrases that make you sound more professional. You can do a note assist. And I thought this was really interesting. I keep a lot of notes on my smartphone. And by the end of the day, it kind of looks like a mishmash that I actually have to relook at my notes and trying to remember what I was writing in my phone. Here, they have a feature where you can say notice this and it can summarize your notes. It can give you headlines with bullet points. It can basically streamline all your notes. So if you're a heavy note taker like I am, this is a really cool feature that they offer. They can also transcript your technology for voice recordings that you've had. So let's say you wanted to record a meeting that you had or a conversation, it can transcribe it for you so you can have it written down.
Yeah, these are really helpful. I will just point out that Apple has this as well. We're not talking about it. We can't really demo it yet because it's not realistically available. It will
Yeah.
be very
Show us
soon.
when it happens
But
because
it is, part of Apple Intelligence. I'm just, balancing out the scales here.
so if we're going to look into the future and think about how AI is helping us with smartphones and in our smartphones, let's look at a couple key points about how we can expect to see it in the future and how we're currently seeing it now. So AI improves the user experience. It's like having a virtual assistant. So with all the notes apps and everything we just mentioned, it's really going to make your phone, sad to say, a bigger part of your life in organizing things. So it's going to make it easier. It's going to make it funner and more intuitive. So having AI built in makes things easier. Having generative AI in your phone is like having an artist in your pocket. You can generate photos, images, even music. So if you even hummed a song, I don't know which phone this was, but one of the phones had the ability, if you hummed a song, it can generate a song from that. Like what? And to have this capability on your phone is incredible. With AI, they're actually able to battery optimize your phone. So they see how long you're spending on certain apps. They know that this app is taking up a lot of your bandwidth. They'll say, hey, let's, adjust the phone so it optimizes the battery length. If they see you're not using certain apps, then it can kind of use the algorithm to adjust that. So that's pretty helpful. Health and fitness apps, we barely touched on this, but I think they're super helpful to help you make smart choices with your life. If it tells you, you can have an app tell you you've been sitting for too long, to get up from your editing, to go walk around the kitchen, or to drink more water. And I feel like those are really cool features that now you can have a little fitness coach in your phone. Location aware, it can tell you like, hey, I'm in a new part of town, where are some good restaurants. It'll know that you're in that new part of town, and it can tell you where the restaurants are, or where the thrift store is, or where the new cookie store is. So you can kind of use the location services to help guide you when you're in a new environment. And lastly, enhanced security. For me, I kind of get a little bit nervous. The phone is learning more and more and more about what I do with my life. Do I want AI to know that? Well, with enhanced security, they say it's just being kept on my phone. It's not being brought to the cloud. And even iPhone having the ability to do a Face ID, so facial recognition when you log in, prevents people from stealing your phone and stealing your data. So I feel like these are all ways that AI is being incorporated in the phone, and I'm sure there's many more, but I think it could be really cool for the future to see how these things grow and change.
Yeah, and to add to that, I think this isn't just about photography, right? I want to include this slide. It's important because we're giving context and perspective here. This isn't about, okay, let's have a conversation around, can the phone replace our cameras? That's not what this is really about. It's not an either or scenario. For some people that might be, if the weight and other issues, and there are scenarios where it could, but that's not really the conversation here. The conversation is understanding where we are right now in the fall of 2024, what the possibilities are, what the capabilities of, what's going to trickle down into our other cameras as well, and then understanding what the capabilities and potential is of the technology we have right now at our fingertips, right? So the virtual assistants thing is so interesting because does anyone remember PDAs, right? Those are the first handheld devices. What was it? Palm, I think it was Palm Pilot. Those
Yeah.
are the first handheld devices. And what did we use it for? The whole promise was it'll be your virtual assistant, your personal and digital assistant. It'll organize your calendar. It'll help you remember your contacts. It was so funny and it was so clunky to look back at how that was. But now it's actually coming full circle. And I think this is going to be way more helpful than we're even thinking it's going to be. It's going to be an integral part of our lives very soon. When, like, even for this call, right before the call, we're like, all right, let's find the link for the Zoom call, log into B&H. We should just be able to tell our computers, all right, log me into what's the next call, who's it with, and log me in, please. Right? These little things that we're going to take for granted very soon are about to come into our hands. Now, from a photographic standpoint, it makes us more efficient. It makes us more effective in what we're doing. And there's other things in here too, right? So the virtual assistants is going to be extremely helpful on a day-to-day basis for photographers from a business perspective, from a personal perspective. The battery optimization, it seems like a small thing, but that's absolutely huge. How many of us have had phones die in like really critical scenarios? We're out hiking and we don't know how to get back. We're on an important phone call and battery is just draining and we're looking at it. It's if nothing works if the battery doesn't, right? So that's actually really important because it's not just better batteries, it's more efficient use of the technology. The health and fitness is there's obvious reasons for that too. And then location aware, what we didn't mention was GPS, right? So these newer models of phones, and not just Apple, but also the Android side of things, we mentioned it briefly in one of the slides. They're accessing satellite information now. So traditionally for SOS, which is a lot of what we do, we're in remote locations all the time, and we take clients out to those remote locations. It's critical for us to stay in contact. If something goes wrong, several people died this year in Death Valley. Or there's record-breaking heat waves all over the place. If you're really in a situation where you're in trouble, being able to access SOS and having a device that the battery is long enough to where it still works is a life-changing scenario. Right. And now that we can go beyond that, we can text message, we can connect with people when we're off the grid. These are very, very important features that maybe doesn't have anything specifically correlated to photography in the traditional sense, but all photographers can benefit from this. As we start to get into locations that we're not familiar with and we're more remote locations, it's keeping us safe. It's keeping that battery on for us. And it's becoming helpful in a variety of scenarios that could potentially be life-saving as well. So we wanted to add that not just from a photography standpoint, but from like just a general day-to-day usefulness standpoint as well.
So here is kind of a chart if you guys want to just take a screenshot of it for your own use. It goes through the differences between, this is the video one, the video slide, talking about video recording for the iPhone 16, the Galaxy, and the Pixel, kind of talking about their differences side by side. So I won't go through it again because it's basically what we talked about, but these are kind of the video features. This one is now the phone features. So you can actually see, actually, this is more like the structural features to see the differences between the 3 different phones, the display, the processor, the RAM, and storage to kind of compare each one. If you guys are really looking to make a purchase, I think definitely take a look at these slides. And lastly, this is the ones featuring the different AI features. So I think it's really interesting to look about how they call each one. So Apple Intelligence, Galaxy AI, Google AI, and then each one has their own text processing. So it's kind of interesting to look at it like this. We kind of spent a bit of time seeing how each one has their own thing. So text processing, the iPhone has a writing tools, grammar check, and summarization. Samsung has, or Galaxy has its chat assist, and Google has its natural language processing. And then it's kind of funny, the voice assistant, the one for Samsung wasn't specified, but we do have Siri and Google Assistant. So it's really interesting if you want to look at how each one is using AI features differently and also very similarly. Lastly, we'd love for you guys to join our community. We've started a community that talks about the future of photography. We talk about everything from AI, new cameras, new iPhones, new smartphones, and everything related to how our photography industry is changing and how we can evolve with it. So if you'd like to join the conversation, scan this QR code and join us. We'd love to have you guys on board. Anything you'd like to add, Cliff?
No, that's it. I appreciate, people spending time with us and for those that stuck around to the end, I hope this has been helpful. And this is just a primer, right? This is going to change. This is going to evolve. And that's one of the reasons why we're doing a series like this, is to keep people in the know, because I just want to reiterate again, this isn't about just, all right, which phone to use, or is mobile photography going to replace DSLRs and all that. Those are all fun conversations to have, sure. But really, this is about understanding where we are right now so you can remain relevant. You can stay up to speed. And that's important. As important as to have these conversations about where AI is headed and will it replace our jobs and how does it, impact us directly. And we've talked about that and we will continue to talk about that. What's most important right now is that we're adapting and we're staying on top of things and understanding the technology that's available right now. And this is technology that's intuitive, that's easy, that fits in the palm of your hand. And that if you don't know about it, your competitors might, right? And even if it's not just a competitive standpoint, there might be some very useful features in here that you may not have known about. And this is about kind of removing those blind spots for you, so you're becoming relevant and aware of what's possible at this very moment. And we'll continue to, keep people updated so we can all stay in the know. And that helps us do the same thing, right? So everyone's kind of on the same page here as we all kind of adapt together. So I'll take that slide off so you can see our wonderful faces here, and we'll leave it at that.
Now that we've gone through it, are you still going to buy the iPhone 16 Pro Max?
Well, I already kind of had a spoiler alert there. I'm going to be picking it up right after this call, mostly just to test it out. Right?
Good.
That's what all photographers say. I'll just swing by B&H and I'll pick up that lens. I'll test it out. I could always bring it back. It's a puppy dog clause, but we never do. So yeah, everything is getting better, obviously. I'd always thought it was kind of funny when they say this is the best camera, the best phone we've ever made. Well, of course it is. You're not going to release something that's worse year after year. The question is whether or not it's good enough, right? And so that's really the tricky part. If you're coming from a 15, I would say it's not quite a huge improvement. The improvements are getting less and less over a year. But I will say for shooting video, it actually is worth the upgrade. And if you have an older model than the 15, that is worth the upgrade as well. If you have the 15 Pro Max switching over the 16, it's a harder decision to make. I will point out too, because I don't think we mentioned that the Apple Intelligence, all those new AI features that are coming out will be available on the 15 Pro Max as well, right? But what we don't know is what exactly it's going to be released and any future updates, what's going to be available on the older model, the 15, or singularly available or solely available on the 16. So yeah, I'll be upgrading, and there's something to be said about utilizing newest technology, and I do it obviously because of the consulting and teaching that we do. I think it's important and relevant to do that. But it's not as significant. It's not an easy decision to be like, oh yeah, this is totally a way to go. If you have the older model, if you have the 15, that's a heck of a good camera too. And I've been quite happy with that. That is a significant difference over the previous model. What are your thoughts?
I'm going to go with the Galaxy.
I'm thinking about it. I would try it. I would try it.
I
Derek's
kind of
laughing
want to go with
there.
all the phones, even like the ones made in China that I don't even know about yet, but I'm sure they're even better than the ones we have here. But I'd love to have like one phone for everything, like because I'd like to have every camera too, but I can't carry them all on my back. But I could get a really big purse and put all the different phones and swipe out the ones that have all the special features when the moment comes.
Just make a Frankenstein phone. Buy them all, piece them together.
Think
Like,
about the perfect camera though. If you ask photographers and we ask them, all right, we want something light, we want something small, we want something, we don't have to replace memory cards, we don't have to replace batteries, we don't need, all these additional lenses. And I want a lens that goes from 12 or 13 millimeters to 200, right? Ideally, maybe 400. But if you give me 12 to 200, like, and I don't have to sit there and replace lenses and worry about dust spots and lens caps, and I don't even need a bag to carry the stuff that I want to carry because I have to carry the thing that carries the things. All that goes away. We don't have that with the iPhone. It's not there. We only have 120 millimeters. But with that Samsung, you actually can go from 12 or 13 to 200 realistically. That's actually pretty freaking cool if you think about it, to have something in your pocket that gives you that much range. That's very practical for a lot of people.
yeah. I mean, and if you think about it, outside of this audience is obviously photographer centric. It's not like we're
Yeah.
broadcasting to a random, group of people who represent most of the general population. Most of the general population isn't into photography like most of the people watching this are. So what is that? I mean, if it looks great to us, it looks amazing to
Right.
them, to somebody who's not even into photography. It's like, wow, I can zoom in on the moon and take a halfway decent picture rather
Right.
than going out and dropping two, three, four, five, $6,000 on a camera that they might pick up twice a year.
Well, here's the thing with that. I have a slightly different perspective on this. I think that most of the general population are photographers now. I think that anyone who's interested in the visual at all, who can see something and wonder what would it look like if I want to just spend a little effort to walk across the street, get something more beautiful, they have a tool in their hands, and anyone that's holding a camera is a photographer. If they're wondering, can I make this look prettier, more beautiful? Can I create something rather than just capture it? They're a photographer, and this makes a lot more people photographers. And I think it's the gateway drug, right? And so I
Mhm.
wanted to mention that because we're giving this presentation in the world's largest camera store, right? And you guys don't sell the iPhone. So it's quite interesting. But what it does is give people a way to get interested in the craft of photography in a very intuitive way that when they do, there are some really important reasons, and this is something we didn't mention, but we should, to consider getting the larger format cameras, right? So for instance, we don't have traditional aperture control on these phones, right? They don't have aperture blades, mostly because they're smaller sensors or they have an inherent depth of field, but we don't have traditional ways of working with and playing with and creating with depth of field, right? We don't have the same shutter speed. So yeah, we can take multiple pictures, but we can't do a 30-second exposure. So it's quite difficult when we're talking about doing star trails, or we're talking about doing night photography. There's very practical reasons, and we know this from a very practical standpoint. We're on the road full time. We've been in Africa and Europe and all over the world this past year, shooting and teaching workshops. And we're using both our phones, but also our DSLRs. Like when we're packing for a 3-month trip around Europe through the Alps in 4 or 5 different countries, it's a significant weight, to really think about, do I want to carry this DSLR and this lens and this lens and the batteries and the memory cards and everything that goes with it? And the answer is we still are, right? We still are because there are reasons. And another one is off-camera flash, right? That's something we didn't talk about, but I think it was Joe McNally that said, if you're not controlling light, you're a part-time photographer. If you're an available light photographer, you're a part-time photographer because you're not crafting with light, you're just working with what's there. And it's beautiful to understand light and work with what's there, but you are very limited. The second you start crafting light, right, and generating light and creating your own light, and this is what Susan does as a master of night photography and light painting, having a traditional tool like a DSLR and a mirrorless camera, this is not replacing it. We don't have proper off-camera flash. I work with Profoto to a degree, working on some of these things, but we don't have the same tools and creative potential that we can with traditional tools, manual mode, off-camera flash, long exposures in the traditional sense. So while this is fun, it's not a question of whether this completely replaces it. For part of it, it will, but I wouldn't consider just either or. I would say for most people, this is a great gateway. This is a great tool for them to explore their creative side. And there's other tools that help them further explore their creative side. And this is, I don't think B&H is going anywhere time soon because that's just going to get better and better. We're not seeing these cheaper entry level market DSLRs anymore, right? That's gone. This has completely replaced that. There's no question. But what we are seeing is rapid development or increased development on the flagship full frame cameras. And all the companies are sort of saying that about publicly. And those are not going to be replaced by phones anytime soon for the things that they do best, right? And so it's just a matter of understanding where that overlap is and what the compromises are. And that's a big part of this, is to keep people informed, right? So you can make the decisions. And the answer is, for us, it's both. We carry our Sonys. I mean, I have this right next to me, right? And then I have this too. And we carry both and we use both all the time. And it doesn't have to be, and one can help the other. What is that? Is that a Barbie camera?
I got my Kodak Pizzazz right next to me. I mean, hey, we
Oh,
keep
look
on
at that. Yeah.
trying. the relic. But no, that's a
You have
lot
your
of.
flip phone right next to you too? Is that like
Where's my flip phone? I have one somewhere. It is in a drawer. A lot of great points there. I want to sneak in one question here before we let you guys go. From Sydney joining us on YouTube, Tony Northrup, Pixel peeped a phone 48 megapixel photo versus a mirrorless 45 megapixel. So phone 48 megapixel versus mirrorless 45 megapixel. The resolution difference was way in favor of the mirrorless picture. What gives?
So we watched this too. I watched Tony Northrup's because I think he's a great co-teacher. So it's great to see what he did with this representation of putting them side by side. And I have to say, I was pretty surprised to see his findings as well. It made me want to do my own research. I was like, wow, I need to really do side by side. I have not done that for all of the cameras, just really probably the smartphone, iPhone, and the Sony I could do. But I was pretty surprised by that as well. Clifford,
Yeah, we
you
both watched that. We watched that on the plane actually. It was quite interesting. And all right, here's what Tony even pointed out too was he's an iPhone user, right? So he's not there just for clickbait. He's not trying to just hate on Apple. He's almost all in on Apple in a lot of different ways. And if you also look back, just look up Tony and look up iPhone. He's released several videos where he's flat out said, like, this is replacing cameras in a lot of ways. It's amazing what we can do with the newer generation iPhone. So it almost contradicts it, almost. But the point he's making is nice, but I feel like it could be a little bit misleading. And what I'd say to that is, if you're just focusing on megapixel resolution, you're not getting the point here, right? Everything we talked about was the capabilities, the creative potential, having 13 to 200 millimeters in your pocket so you can play around with lens compression when you maybe don't have a 200 you're carrying around all the time. You can play with long exposure when you don't have ND filters all the time. You can start playing with slow motion in video and capture incredible, meaningful results when you don't have a gimbal with you. There's all these things that are at your fingertips now, and I would urge you to do this. Focus more on the quality of the image, right, versus image quality. And if you're all the conversations about image quality, we're missing the point. It's like we're talking about how to learn the chords and the scales rather than how to create a song, right? And if we focus on what actually goes into a good photo, and any tool that inspires you to do it is going to be the best tool for you. And if you can create a photo and create an image that has an impact that is beyond just, oh, look how sharp it is, look at the dynamic range, look how the details are not blown out or there's no noise in there, then you're onto something. You should create an image in spite of those image quality flaws, so to speak. And the irony is that's what people are doing right now. You see a whole generation of people going back to film. I'm shooting with an XPan app. You can look it up, XPAN, and it gives us this like traditional way of getting an XPan. And it's just exploring the creativity of this all and having fun with it. So if you're watching the Tony, and you should go watch it, but if you're thinking, well, I'm not going to get this because it doesn't have the same resolution and the megapixel aren't as good.
Well, the truth
Focus
is,
on
I think you're
photo
missing the
in
point.
spite of
He was
that.
saying that the megapixels is the same, but the quality wasn't the same. So
Yeah,
if you watch
yeah.
Tony Northrup, it was saying that it really isn't a 48, it's like a 5 megapixel. I was
Yeah.
kind of curious about that too. I
And,
love
and
a response from
and
Apple.
that's what we mentioned too, was like take the megapixels with a grain of salt on any camera, by the way, because there's a lot more that goes into it than just the numbers, right? And arguably, you
Yeah.
want something that inspires you. That could be the Barbie camera that Derek's using. That could be
Mhm.
any phone that we have. It could be, we work with two photographers in Norway this past winter who had the most expensive cameras in the world, most expensive lenses. And I was walking around with my iPhone, and we were both inspired, right? And it's not that one is better than the other. Those are 100 plus megapixel, large format cameras. If they're inspired by that, good. If you're inspired by a phone, great. But whatever inspires you to go out and create, focus on creating and crafting something that can inspire and have impact on others. And it's not about the resolution. It's not about the dynamic range and all of that. So I totally get, and it's important for people like Tony to have videos that keep it in perspective, but just have perspective when you watch that video as well.
Totally. Very well said once again, Cliff. It's a totally loaded topic, but keep arguing about it, people, because it's job security for all of us in this
Mhm.
industry.
Yeah,
Keep coming
yeah,
up with new technology, keep bouncing back and forth. Like Cliff said, and now the trend is low megapixel early digital point and shoot cameras. So
Interesting.
cyclical, it's like fashion. It always comes back around. Some younger
They'll learn to
generation's gonna find a fascination with the stuff that we used yesteryear. But huge thank you to Cliff and Susan once again. Another wonderful presentation, chock full of information. We did drop the link to parts 1 through 7. So if you haven't caught up, well, you got some time to catch up there. But Cliff, Susan, good seeing you guys as always. And
It's our
until
pleasure.
next time, that is it. Another edition of the B&H Virtual Event Space now in the books. Catch y'all next time.